candidates here who are running for District 6 Congressional seat in Florida. Democratic candidate Josh Wheel. Libertarian candidate Andrew Parrott. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us tonight. We very much appreciate it. I do want to mention that invitations were extended to Republican candidate Randy Fine, who declined due to his commitments in Tallahassee during the session, and also to NPA candidate Mr. Randall Terry, who declined to respond to us. Well, without further ado, let's get to the heart of the matter. And for that, I'm going to introduce tonight's moderator, Ann Smith. Ann is a longtime league member. She's a former league president. She is also on our board serving as parliamentarian and has been moderating and coordinating these candidates forum for as many years as I can remember. So we're in great hands today. I want to give a special thanks to Ann for all the work she's done in coordinating this. So at this time, please welcome our moderator, Ann Smith.
Thank you, Nikki, and good evening and welcome to our candidates and our guests to the Congressional District 6 Candidates Forum. I am Ann Smith. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Volusia County, and I will be moderating tonight's forum on behalf of the League of Women Voters US, League of Women Voters Florida, and the League of Women Voters of Volusia County. We expect all candidates to conduct themselves with decorum when answering questions and giving their opening and closing comments. This is an opportunity for candidates to promote themselves rather than focusing on an opponent. Being respectful and courteous does make a difference. Before we begin, everyone in the audience, please, turn off your cell phones, number one. But if you are recording, please know that the recording must be shown in its entirety from beginning to end, and there must be a statement at the beginning of the recording that says that neither any of the leagues that are promoting this forum do not endorse the candidates nor the parties to which they belong. The league is nonpartisan, and we do not endorse candidates, nor do we have anything to do with political parties as an organization. We educate citizens about issues, host forums, and register voters. Our major goal here tonight is to provide an avenue where citizens can gather information to help them make an informed decision. We are doing this as a public service. Nikki has already introduced our candidates as well as explained why Senator Fine and Randall Terry could not join us tonight. I'll begin by explaining the format. There will be a 2-minute opening comment and a 3-minute closing comment by both candidates. The order has been determined by a flip of the coin for each. We will ask questions developed earlier by the league and will ask as many questions as there is time allotted. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question, and I will alternate who answers first. Our timer, Kathy Egley, sitting in the front, raise your hand, Kathy, will hold up a sign, candidates, when you have 30 seconds left when speaking, and a stop sign when your time is up. The same procedure will be used for both the opening and closing remarks. In fairness to all, you must not go beyond the time allotted for your comments or your answers. Are there any questions? All right, then let's get started. So we did a flip of the coin, and Mr. Wheel will be giving the first opening statement. 2 minutes. Mr. Wheel.
represent you in the United States Congress. I want to thank the League of Women for hosting this forum. I also want to thank all of you here for listening and investing the time to make an informed decision. I offer you the best protection for 3 reasons. First, I consider public office to be a sacred trust. Second, I believe that elective office is a public service, not a business opportunity. And third, I will do the best job of fighting for Florida in Congress. As a public school teacher, I've spent my career working with at-risk youth in Title I schools. Every day, we work tirelessly to serve our students. We don't try to take money from them as business clients. In contrast, my opponent and his Republican buddies in Congress think government is a business whose purpose is to minimize public services and profit off of we the people. I believe in the institution. We the people agree that the purpose of government is to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for defense, promote welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Nowhere in that statement of our founding fathers does it say to profit off of people or destroy our infrastructure with an unelected chainsaw. The United States was created to limit government power. We don't
Little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. That was by one of our founders, James Madison. So that's one of the reasons that I'm here in this race, is there's a little bit too much going on in Washington. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. And as you know, I'm the Libertarian candidate for Congress in this special election. And as a Libertarian, I believe in the truth that liberty is the birthright of every individual, not granted by government, but by our Creator. And if you're like me, you can see a world where liberty is under attack, not only by tyrants abroad, but by our own institutions, including the executive branch. We're living in an age when the state ignores our freedoms, where our bureaucracies and politicians tell us they know better how to live our lives. They tax us to fund unconstitutional programs, regulate us into submission, surveil us under the guise of safety. And being a libertarian, I am in agreement with your mission that government must be restrained, not just in theory, but in practice. No sprawling bureaucracy, no endless wars, no central bank printing billions and devaluing our labors. The Constitution isn't a suggestion or a living document that can be changed on a whim. It is a chain on the beast of power, and we must continue to forge new links in that chain that were allowed to be broken through neglect. But liberty is not just about fighting the state, it's about trusting the individual. And you and I know that free people, when left to their own devices, will build, create, and thrive. We don't need a nanny in Washington or a massive globalist boardroom. We need to defend property rights, free markets, individual liberty, and also need to have the courage to say no when our right to live in peace is threatened.
Thank you. Mr. Perry, you get to answer the first question first. What is the top concern that has prompted you to run for Congress, and how will you address it?
Well, one of the top concerns is government inefficiency. We are right now, we have ceded our power as a state, as the state of Florida, to the federal government over time and neglect of our individual liberties. We are allowing the schools to be run from Washington when we can better see them served by running them here at home. The teachers that are here in the schools, they would love nothing more than to be turned loose and teach the children everything they need to know. That's one reason. The inflation is another. Government spending out of control. We spend trillions of dollars around the world, and all that ends up doing is inflating our own currency here at home, causing larger home prices, higher grocery prices, and it's just generally not the best way to operate. We need to restore power to the individual.
Thank you. Mr. Wheel, the question is, what is the top concern that has prompted you to run for Congress, and how will you address it?
So as a public school teacher, I entered this race because of the threat to our public school systems. The Federal Department of Education provides an incredible infrastructure. It is directly connected to over 97,000 public schools across this country, and it provides direct funding to our schools. The supplemental federal funding that we get for our Title I schools, for our students with special needs, can make up above 35% of the budget for some of our schools in Florida. And if that percentage seems high, you got to remember that percentages get bigger when the denominator is smaller, because we have some of the lowest per student funding in the country here in Florida. We rely on that federal money more than many other states do. As a member of the school leadership team at a Title I middle school for the past 3 years, I know exactly how important that money is. We are currently stretched saran wrap thin, doing everything we can to serve our students and families. And the loss of that money would be catastrophic. Across the state, we would be talking about school closures, school consolidations, and increases in class size, because it is near impossible in some cases now to meet the class size requirements on the budgets that our schools are given here in Florida. And when you take away that additional funding, it will be completely impossible. Now, the absolute thing that we have to do in response to that is we have to get in front of this. You cannot dismantle the Federal Department of Education through executive order. It must come through Congress. And by being able to get an extra vote into Congress, by being able to message this and get in front of it, we have an opportunity to save our schools, not just here in Florida, but across the country.
Thank you. Mr. Wheel, question 2. How will you protect the constitutional authority of Congress to establish agencies and policies and then fund them?
So we are in an honest to God constitutional crisis. That is not hyperbole or exaggeration. Last month, the President of the United States went on national television and claimed that he had the power to make laws and interpret them. It is the boldest power grab that we have seen in the history of our nation. To take and presume the power for his office that are explicitly granted in the Constitution to both the legislative and judicial branches of government. Presidents have been assuming power as long as we've had this country. It is how the office of the president has become more powerful today than it was 250 years ago. But we rely on checks and balances. We rely on separation of power. This country is not a business. It is a government that is designed to secure life, land, and liberty for everyone who resides in it. These powers will be taken by him if our legislators in Congress do not stand up and fight back. And we must have a vocal Congress. It has been, in my opinion, embarrassing that with 213 Democrats in Congress right now, we tend to see only about 2 or 3 of them actually on TV vocalizing and messaging the importance of standing up to the President of the United States as he attempts to usurp that power from them. And it's even more embarrassing that in a majority white body, that these are people like Maxwell Frost, Jasmine Crockett, and Al Green, and that they're allowing some of their limited number of Black members to be the human shield for them so they can sit back while this goes on. We need to spur every single member of Congress and every last one in our party to stand up and vocalize and push back on this to ensure that we still have 3 branches of government in 2028.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott, the same question. Would you like it repeated?
Please.
How will you protect the constitutional authority of Congress to establish agencies and policies and then fund them?
Okay. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States gives us, it lays out the areas of the purview of Congress and what they are there to regulate. Where we're ending up now is we've given far too much over to the executive authority. We are allowing the Congress, and I'm in pretty hard agreement with my counterpart here that the executive has been given too much power over time. We do have 3 co-equal branches of government that we need to preserve. And being the voice that says we're not doing that. That's not our job. That's not your job to the president or to any other members of Congress that when they try to expand programs that are not amongst the purview of the legislative branch, we need to make sure that that is something that we stand up to. So most of this comes down to funding, and funding is the critical thing that gives us a lot of the troubles that we have today when it comes to where we go with our problems. So inflation, huge problem. Most of that comes from spending. When we're printing money out of thin air, we end up overspending and the price of everything goes up around you. So that's one place we need to be reined in as Congress critters to make sure that the people that we're there to serve are actually being served well. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Parrott. Question number 3. What are your budgetary priorities and how will you secure funding as a member of a minority party?
Well, that is a very good one. Budgetary priorities would be ensuring, for one, that any of the programs that we have in place now that are being ruled by the citizens, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, are continued to be funded, not in perpetuity, but for those who have paid into the system, I want them to receive the benefits that they have been promised. For those that are not yet into the system, I promote an opting out of the system so that they no longer have to really fund another person's retirement, Medicaid, whatever. One of the biggest ways to do that is through the fair tax. That would be a replacement of the income tax with the repeal of the 16th Amendment, the closing of the IRS, the money that would be then raised through a national retail sales tax. April 15th would become another spring day that you would just enjoy going out on and not have to worry about paying Uncle Sam. You would be doing that every time you went to the grocery store. Every time anyone who is not paying income tax now would go to the grocery store, they would be paying for all of those benefits that everybody has earned and over the past 100 years or so has come to rely on. So that is one of my main things that I would love to see, just in the interest of getting us to a fiscal responsibility point, is enacting the fair tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Reel, would you like the question repeated?
Yes, ma'am.
What are your budgetary priorities and how will you secure funding as a member of a minority party?
So first off, I don't really plan on being a member of a minority party for too long. We have, after Election Day in November, there were 220 Republicans, 215 Democrats. We've seen 2 Republicans, including Mike Waltz, who vacated this seat that we're running for right now, leave, bringing the Republican total down to 218. Victoria Spartz of Indiana decaucused and left the Republican Party, which brings it to 217. And one day, the Republicans will actually vote upon and confirm Elise Stefanik to be UN ambassador, and that'll bring them to 216. Unfortunately, it's not as close as it was a month ago. In the last few weeks, we have lost 2 sitting members of Congress from the Democratic Party, and Representative Sylvester Taylor and Raul Grijalva, which brings us down to 213. Those are 2 very safe blue seats that will hold special elections this summer. And if Gabe Alamon up in District 1 and myself handle our business on April 1st, we will be members of the majority party in Congress. Having said that, the number 1 priority is that we need to preserve our infrastructure and support system. And here in District 6, no more important than for our seniors and veterans. The projected and suggested cuts to Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare are absolutely unacceptable. The Social Security is not an entitlement. It is something that we have all paid into on every paycheck for our entire careers. No one gets the opportunity to opt out of 6% FICA. The fact that our seniors have paid into this that they are relying on it now and that it is at risk of being cut or taken away from them is abhorrent, and we need to stop that immediately. In addition, we need to be working to fix our housing system, and there is no way when people under 40 have an average wealth in this country of $6,000, and most people are living paycheck to paycheck to pay their rent, that anyone is able to afford a 3% down payment without assistance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wheel, what are your thoughts about the impact of the economy on the economy caused by tariffs against Canada and Mexico?
So the president of the United States has this thing with trade deficits, and it's his own personal little predilection, but it's important to understand that a trade deficit is not a budget deficit. A budget deficit occurs when we spend more money than we have. Universally pretty much understood to be not the best thing. A trade deficit occurs when we purchase more goods from one country than they purchase from us. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not something that needs to be solved or resolved. There are 40 million people living in Canada. There are over 360 million people living in the United States. In order to balance out the trade between the two countries, Canadians would have to purchase 9 times as many goods from us as we purchase from them. And the major problem with that is that nobody likes purchasing stuff like Americans do. We love buying stuff. Tariffs that are an attempt to balance an arbitrary trade deficit create additional prices for consumers. The only way these tariffs will adjust the trade deficit by slowing down American consumption, by making goods too expensive for us to be able to acquire, which is not what any of the American people asked for when they voted for economic relief last November.
Mr. Perry, what are your thoughts about the impact on the economy caused by tariffs Canada and Mexico?
Now, the current administration does seem to have an overly sized love of tariffs, which I'm not a fan of myself, because they do end up getting paid by the end user, just like any other tax that you tax a big business. Tax goes to the end user. They don't say, well, shucky darn, we're just going to have to lose money this year because they raised our taxes. We are running trade deficits. The latest CR that was over in deficit spending, adding on to the $37 trillion in debt that we already have on the books. So if we were to shrink the size of government to pre-900 levels, then we could conceivably fund our entire government by running tariffs. That's not feasible. That is not a wise thing to do, and not a wise thing to do to our friends and neighbors, be them to the north, to the south, or even to China. We have other issues to go with China that involve the de minimis rule, which we can talk about. I could talk about it for days, because that's a huge problem with a lot of the import of Chinese goods that we're getting now for such little money, being good consumers and spending so little money. China's not paying tariffs or any of the pre-agreed tariffs that they were supposed to pay on the number of goods that they're bringing, abusing some of the systems that Congress has put in place. So that's another thing that I plan on fixing when I get Washington, and make it a little bit more of a fair trade situation. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Perry, do you support passage of federal voting rights legislation to provide national standards for voter registration and access to the ballot? Please explain why or why not.
We do need some level of auditability. Is the biggest thing that we need in the elections. In 2016, Hillary Clinton said there was no way that man could have won, that he had to have cheated, that there was obvious Russian interference, hacking of the election system. We need a more auditable system, because you may know 4 years after that, there was another incident where everybody was saying, not everybody, of course, but there were a lot of folks saying that Donald Trump must have, he must have stolen the election. Or Joe Biden must have stolen the election by fault. Got Donald Trump on the brain. Anyway, that is one of the things that we need, is a level of standardization across the nation that we can say, is your system auditable? Yes or no. Simple as that. If we can audit it within a reasonable amount of time, then we can say that it is a good system. If it can't be audited, if it can't be looked into past a bunch of court cases that end up putting George Bush in power over Al Gore, however it works out, we need something that is more auditable. That is the biggest focus that I want to put on any voting rights legislation and registration for the individual, that they will never be able to be told that they do not have a right to vote as long as they are a citizen of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wheel, do you support passage of federal voting rights legislation to provide national standards for voter registration and access to the ballot? Why or why not?
So first off, voting needs to be an inalienable right in this country. We have seen the ability to remove that right from citizens used aggressively to remove the vote, particularly from people of color in this country, over and over again. We have seen the sale of for-profit prisons and deliberate attempts to raise sentencing on borderline carceral offenses in order to fill those prisons, again, over and over, with predominantly people of color, taking away their right to vote and their ability to engage in the civic process. Not only that, but then they put the for-profit prisons in rural areas, and they count the prison population towards the local population there to assist in gerrymander procedures and ensure more what oftentimes is conservative representation across the state or the country as a result of it. We need inalienable voting rights. It should be something that no leader can be incentivized to take away from members of their opposition party. And look, if we had polling places inside jails, they would be the most secure polling places in the country. In addition to that, I do think we need federal regulation, not just for voting rights, but for a number of issues, for housing, we need stronger federal support for education. We need federal insurance regulation. And Florida is one of the #1 examples why. There is no better argument against states' rights than the state of Florida, which has deregulated housing, deregulated insurance, short-funded education over and over again. And we need to remember that every person in America is an American. And this idea that we want competitive states where some state is best at something in education or housing and some state is 50th just means that we're looking for some Americans to be at the bottom.
Thank you. Mr. Wheel, how would you balance the demands of development, for example, fracking, drilling, etc., with the need to protect our natural resources?
Well, the demands for fracking and energy development come from the companies that profit off of fracking and energy development. We have allowed large oil and energy companies to have too much weight and power to use their funding to lobby, to contribute to campaigns, to sway our legislative body in ways that benefit them over the people that our elected representatives are supposed to be serving. It is, again, embarrassing that we have not committed to renewable energies at a larger level by this point. As a science teacher, there's a documentary that called Power Surge. That's a NOVA documentary that I used to show my kids every year when we reached this unit. And in it, there's a man who shows that there's no silver bullet to curbing our carbon consumption and cutting down and getting back to the levels that we need to be. But there are, and this was documented in like 2011, 2012. At that time, there were 15 different viable, in production, ready to go things that we could do, each of which could handle 1/7 of the problem, which meant that we had all of the resources available to cut our carbon consumption without limiting our energy usage 15 years ago, to cut it double if we invested in all of them. And we continue to try to dig up dead dinosaurs and tear down our forests and destroy our beaches, all in the interest of large energy corporations, never in the interest of the people who inhabit this planet.
Mr. Perry, how would you balance the demands of development, for instance, fracking and drilling, with the need to protect our natural resources?
Well, fracking and drilling are a thing that happens. My grandfather actually owned some oil wells out in Kansas back in the day. And they were not very big profitable wells. He wasn't a big oil man, but he was helping by using some grazing land that he had and owning the oil wells on them, that he could actually contribute. So that was through a lot of regulation. That is still available as an option. Our thirst for oil is not going away, especially as more and more people are driving larger and larger vehicles, SUVs, giant pickup trucks, all of these things that are gas hogs, that we did pass legislation intending to fix that. These are EPA regulations, those CAFE standards, the fuel efficiency standards that you'll see attached to every new car or every car that you buy. These standards have been abused by the automakers because they're trying to fit more profit into their vehicles. That's great. Profit is always a good thing. However, it's at the detriment of we, the people down here, larger vehicles, larger, bigger accidents, more costly accidents. And I drive a 50 mile to the gallon hybrid car just trying to do my part. I won't go full electric just yet because the infrastructure is not there. That's another thing to focus on, is better energy production in a more local fashion through nuclear power, which would be the neighborhood nuclear small reactor model, which is a fantastic way to get electricity to the electric cars that the future is built on.
Thank you. Mr. Perry.
We'll get used to this
I know.
microphone swapping thing at some
Keep
point.
doing it.
I'm just trying to share.
With the, what has been going on recently with the Department of Education, what responsibilities or authority, if any, do you believe must remain in effect with the federal government? Please explain why you are saying that.
The Department of Education, that is a very, very hot button issue at the moment. Not a lot of people I know want to see it completely obliterated. I would like to see it as an advisory organization that not providing funding, but providing information to the schools and giving metrics for the schools and their performance, so that we can raise all students up from the hinterlands of Appalachia all the way to the best public schools in the District of Columbia or Fairfax County, which is more likely where you're going to find a high-performing public school, not Dunbar High School. Well, that's a fun one. What I would like to see, instead of us sending our tax dollars through the fair tax, of course, to Washington, then to have them redistributed back to us by the federal government, which by hook or by crook, one way or the other, one party can cut, another party can increase. Let's just keep our money here in the state, spend it on our students, let the federal government take over the process of measurement exclusively. If we, as Mr. Wild probably knows, that we are not only seeing a crisis of reading and writing and mathematic proficiencies, that the teachers need to have a little bit more flexibility, and that local governments will give them an easier path towards that flexibility, serving each individual student as they need to be served. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beal, the same question with what's happening with the Department of Education. What responsibilities or authority, if any, do you believe must remain in effect with the federal government? Please explain the reasons for your answer.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of government is to secure life, land, and liberty for all people inside its borders. Our education system is essential to developing our young citizens, our future this country. A democracy depends on a well-educated populace. What the federal government does is it provides a standardization level that allows us to raise all states without a centralized federal education system. The range, the deviation from our greatest schools and our top performing states to our least performing states can go dangerously far and low. We're already in one of the lowest performing states. And as I mentioned earlier, in Florida, you used to be able to make fun of Mississippi or West Virginia and be like, well, at least we're not that bad. But in recent years, we have been, and in some metrics, worse. Every child in America deserves a free and appropriate public education. We have decided that it is law. And in order to ensure that they receive it, we need to make sure that we have a strong federal Department of Education that can provide these standards, the support, and the additional supplemental funding for our low-income communities and our students with special needs.
Thank you. Next question. What reductions, if any, to social services would you support as resources are reviewed by DOGE?
So when it comes to the Department of Government Efficiency or just government efficiency in general, I think it's important to just restate that governments are not supposed to be efficient. Governments are not businesses. The purpose of a government is not to wage war and make a profit, right? If you want to make your business more profitable, you streamline power and decision-making for efficiency and profitability. We have built-in redundancies in our government. They are called separations of power. We are not trying to streamline and consolidate power in any one place, most especially in the Oval Office. Now, having said that, I think a lot of the outrage, a lot of the issues people have with our spending and our inability to rein in our spending is not how much we go over budget. It's not that we spend $2, $3, $4 trillion over budget each year. It's that we spend $2, $3, $4 trillion over budget each year without making any meaningful change. And this is something that over the last 4 months, traveling this district, speaking with whether they're Republicans or Democrats or anywhere in between, is something that I've heard from them over and over again. It's not that we spent $4 trillion extra last year. It's that we spent $4 trillion extra last year, and we still haven't done anything about 40,000 homeless vets. It's that we spent $4 trillion extra last year, and we did nothing to deal with housing issues or to improve our schools significantly. We haven't made real changes to healthcare to ensure access for all Americans. There are so many problems that we could fix with $4 trillion. Like if I gave anyone in here $4 trillion this year to solve just one problem, I feel pretty confident you could do it. And somehow we fail.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perry, what reductions, if any, to social services would you support as resources are reviewed by DOGE?
Now, as I stated earlier, there are some that we should be avoiding touching with the chainsaw as much as possible. We know that there are going to be necessary cuts, and a lot of those come from bloated management structures that go into some of the distribution systems that we have in the public spending arena. Where we're suffering from a lot of that is in the homelessness problems. We'll see using places like Los Angeles as a metric, we'll see $1 million given to a homeless charity. Okay, great. Government grant goes to homeless charity. Most of that money has ended up in the pockets of the leaders of that charity in the form of salaries, benefits, kickbacks from contractors, et cetera. So in Los Angeles, it costs $700,000 to build one dwelling unit for one individual, where it can be much more easily done at a local level, which is where a lot of the homelessness issues really do arise from. If we were to get back to zoning, this is not necessarily a congressional thing. This is more I love my people thing. Getting zoning regulations to stop building exclusively single-family homes behind gated communities for retirees and people moving down from up north that have exceptionally large 401ks that bring them down here and live like kings. While meanwhile, we do have our homeless veterans on the street that need to be cared for. Spoke with one fellow who can't get his ride to the VA because that was a Doge cut. We need to be very careful with what projects we do try to cut.
All right. Next question, which is question number 9. When, if ever, is it appropriate to compromise to pass legislation?
It would have to be exceptionally rare to compromise on, well, again, I guess it should be said, compromise on what? That would be the biggest question, when it comes down to compromising on, are we going to spend more on this project or that project? We can see that there's always room to make a deal. If we go back just to the last budget that was passed, or the last continuing resolution that was passed in December, I believe it was, prior to the Christmas break for Congress. It started off with a 15,000-page spending bill, and then was winnowed down more and more and more and more. Finally, it was agreeable to all. That now we're going to pay for some of those things that were compromised upon in the current spending bill, and some of those going forward. But when it comes to principles like smaller government, that's something that I'm going to be a pretty hard pass on. When it comes to spending money that we don't absolutely have to spend on the under the Article 1, Section 8 view of what Congress's job is to do, that's a hard pass. If it comes to spending too much money, I'm not going to try and drive up the debt, because all that's going to do is drive up the price of everything from housing to your groceries, as we've said before, to the cost of gas, to everything goes up every dollar that Congress spends. And I want to make sure that there's one thing that I can do, and that's spend less of your money, period.
Thank you, Mr. Wheel. When, if ever, is it appropriate to compromise to pass legislation?
I think that it's important to compromise as long as we're talking about, dealing with which program or which solution. When we're talking about alternative solutions to solving a problem, one of the things that I've seen in education far too often is that, compromise winds up not being, should we do program A or program B? It winds up being that we will half fund program A and we will half fund program B, and neither of them are able to actually be implemented with fidelity as a result of it. And the sum of the two is less than what either would have been on its own. I think it's important that, we're focusing solution oriented on how to meet the needs of the people here in this country. Um, when it is absolutely unacceptable to compromise is when we're talking about whether people in this country are valid, whether any Americans don't deserve the same rights or treatment as other Americans do. You know, we have a number of marginalized communities, including our LGBTQ plus community right now, that are seeing their rights to exist put at risk by this current administration. And there's absolutely no time or place where it is acceptable to compromise on their humanity.
Thank you. Question number 10. Do you support passage of a federal law codifying access to contraception and abortion? Why or why not?
Absolutely, I do. And I'm incredibly disappointed that 4 years ago at this time, when the Democratic Party had full control over the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, that we did not. That we allowed that opportunity to pass by without protecting bodily autonomy for half of the citizens of this country. It seems to be left out of the conversation too often, but women are in fact human beings and should have all of the same rights as everyone else. And to say that they cannot access healthcare, that they do not have the ability to make decisions over their bodies on their own without a husband or a father or a government official to approve of it is absolutely ludicrous and inhumane. All healthcare decisions should be able to be made by the person that they're regarding. That is bodily autonomy. That is the ultimate freedom. And in the United States of America, for us to be removing those freedoms and to be removing them selectively from half of this country is unacceptable.
Mr. Parrott, do you support passage of a federal law codifying access to contraception and abortion? Why or why not?
Well, as I stated on the League of Women Voters questionnaire, that I am unapologetically pro-life. I believe that life is the proper choice when a choice is to be made. However, this is part of our problem as we go forward. Who is making the choices for us? When we give the federal government the ability to pass a law that is outside of their purview of their constitutional purview of saying you may or may not, then it becomes something that we've given government too much power to do. We cannot allow the government to say, today we will, tomorrow we won't. We need to make this a cultural issue. That's it was the great Ron Paul who said that abortion shouldn't be illegal. It should be unthinkable. It should be something that, of course, is your choice, but to choose life is the best choice. There's a thing called the Mexico City Rule, and it was a executive order passed by Ronald Reagan, or signed by Ronald Reagan, that was basically to ban the federal funding of abortion. So as soon as his successor, George Bush, was out of office, Bill Clinton rescinded that rule. And then as soon as Clinton was out of office, Bush reinstated it. And that's a game that we need to stop playing. We need to just, again, resort to local issues. Take this issue locally. If you believe it is your right locally and you want to have an abortion clinic in your neighborhood with flashing neon lights, that's your business. Please, I would allow you to fund it. Please don't make me fund it through my tax dollars or through any further spending. I would have to say also that keeping laws off of our bodies is very important.
Thank you. Question number 11, and the last question before final closing comments. Being specific, how would you balance tax cuts and reduce the national debt?
Well, I've already stated the easiest, possibly most simplistic way of doing that is by enacting the fair tax. One thing that would do is it would reduce compliance costs on businesses, on individuals. We wouldn't need, of course, some businesses would go out of business and hopefully they would turn into just great places where you could go and have somebody managing your money for you because you've got so much of it that you were able to keep. That would be the businesses like H&R Block who do tend to take advantage of an overly burdensome taxation system that is 1% you must and 99% of the tax system says except these times, most of which are driven at large businesses, not benefiting the individual. So the spreading of the tax burden across everybody at that point, from the people who are no longer paying, like the Jeff Bezos and Donald Trumps, who do not pay taxes at the same level as a school teacher does. We are looking at a better system is what we need to start cutting all of the national debt problems that we have to become a more successful and profitable and better place to live, a better place to immigrate to, where there will be more jobs for immigrants, more places for companies to come and invest their dollars in building plants. Yeah, that's the fair tax is probably the absolute best way forward to getting us out of debt, because it brings into the fold all those people that have been cheating on their taxes, frankly.
Thank you. Mr. Rio, how would you balance tax cuts and reduce the national debt?
Tax the rich. We have for far too long put the burden on taxes on our working class people. As Mr. Parrott just mentioned, the majority of the loopholes in our income tax system are designed for the wealthy and for corporations. There's a famous interview I remember from when Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee, and they were talking to him about his taxes while he was sitting outside of his plane. And, they asked him, like, shouldn't it be illegal, or, you have no shame that you paid no income tax last year? He was like, whoa. He's like, look, we followed the income tax laws, like, for the amount of money and everything, for millions of dollars that we did. When you put it through the system, it came out and said that I didn't have to pay any. He's like, now, if you want to talk about whether we need to rewrite those laws, that's a whole different thing. But the code is designed to provide as little burden as possible for the people with the most and as much burden as possible for the people with the least. And to be honest, I'm not really too concerned with our national debt. It is not shown to be an end of the world problem. More than 80% of our debt is money that we owe to future us. And the fact that we have our own currency that we can print gives us elasticity to be able to respond to needs of the people, right? FEMA, or an emergency management system, doesn't work at a state or local level, right? Because Volusia County can bounce a check. The state of Florida can bounce a check. The United States of America cannot bounce a check. We need $4 trillion overdrawn and get it clear. And when emergency happens, like a Hurricane Milton, or God forbid, going back 20 years to Hurricane Katrina, there is no amount of money that a state or local government could put aside to prepare for the needs of the people in that situation. But the federal government always can.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much to our candidates for answering the questions. And now we have our closing comments. The closing comments, each candidate will get 3 minutes. We did another flip of the coin, and the first closing statement will be made by Mr. Parrott. Mr. Parrott, you're on.
Okay, well, I'd like to really thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us here today. This has been a great opportunity, a great time to promote our campaigns. And I believe that you see sitting before you two different methods of one big government, one small government. And when you have a big government, they cannot recognize the individual for the value that individual has. The individual is what this country was built upon, and without the rights that are allowed the individual, that our Constitution is supposed to be binding our government against, infringing upon, we are not going to last long as a nation. No matter how much we spend, every time the government spends money, it ends up coming out of your pocket. So whether it be for subsidized housing allowances, subsidized student loan balances, subsidized anything, that means your cost goes up. One of the beliefs that I have is if you think it's a good idea, cut a check. Our democracy will work that way so much better. To how our neighborhoods look, to where we are able to afford to live. Zoning is a huge problem, allowing cities to walk away from single-family dwelling unit types of housing models like Los Angeles. If they could build more high-density housing, they'd be in a lot better shape. If we'd allow more individuals, especially a place where a lot of the money can come from is churches. I'm a apostolic Pentecostal. I believe that it is our duty to help out the individuals. If somebody needs help, I'm there to help them. I've befriended many a homeless person. I've helped out people in innumerable situations, getting cars running, doing my part that the government can't do because there's no love coming from a government. There's no way that the government can love anyone as much as the individual can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wheel, 3 minutes.
Thank you. And, I as well would like to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this event. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and the rest of your team for making this possible. We're in a place right now where Floridians are struggling, right? They voted for economic change in November. They voted because they couldn't afford to live in Florida anymore. Housing was too expensive. Insurance was too expensive. Groceries were too expensive. We have a Republican nominee in this race who has been on the state legislature here in Florida for the last 8 years. He voted to deregulate insurance. He voted to deregulate housing. He voted to keep our school budgets as low as possible. He is the problem that we are seeking assistance from the federal government from. Floridians need Washington to protect us from Florida. And that's where we're at. We have a federal government now run by an authoritarian wannabe dictator who is following the Project 2025 playbook, which is 993 pages of absolute horror show that, he spent his entire campaign telling us he was not going to run. And then he has been going page by page, line by line since taking office on January 20th. We have already seen cuts to VA system. We've already seen cuts to our schools and our education system. We've seen cuts to US aid, as if, US aid just flies helicopters over Africa and opens the payloads for dollars to, rain and sprinkle down, and not that US aid was actually our solution to how we sustain our American agricultural and farming system, and what we do with the surplus of agricultural goods to ensure that we continue to have a local farming system here in this country. We've seen hurt come to farmers. We've seen hurt come basically everywhere. It was a fast and furious barrage that appears to be designed to desensitize people to how much devastation it was doing. But the truth of the matter is that when you impact everything, you impact everyone. Because maybe education or farming or the VA didn't affect you, but eventually it got to your Social Security, or eventually it got to your something. And we have a number of voters in this district that are being severely impacted by these policies. We need to take back Washington. We need to assert the rights of the legislative branch to ensure that the office of the president does not take those powers, that we do not wind up in an authoritarian government where one man controls all the power of the federal government. And we need to stand up and we need to protect
they think, read how they act, because that's the kind of person that you will be sending to Washington. And it is so very important. Remember that it is your right, but more importantly, it is your responsibility to vote, because voting does make a difference. Every single one. Don't forget that. Go to bed thinking about it tonight. Make sure you vote, and make sure you get your friends and your neighbors to do the same. One last, 2 days from now is the deadline to be able to get a vote by mail ballot, 5 o'clock on the 20th. And early voting opens in every county on Saturday, March 22nd, and runs through Saturday, March 29th. And if you don't get a chance to vote then, April 1st, let's get out, vote, and vote. Don't be like Chicago, but make sure you do. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Ann Smith. Ann is one of those league treasures that we don't know what we would do without. She is the person, not only did she moderate this, but she is responsible for this whole setup. So please join me in thanking Ann Smith. I really need to thank my team, Nancy Vaughn, who's technology here and making sure this is streamed successfully. Kathy Egley, who is here doing our timekeeping. I personally want to thank our candidates, Mr. Wheel and Mr. Parrott, for being with us, but also for your very thoughtful answers. We need more intelligent civic discussion in this community, in this country. I do want to have a couple of announcements. First of all, the league invites you, all of you, whether you're members or not, to our programs throughout the year. And on March 27th, which is a week from Thursday, right in this room is our next program. It starts at 5:30. It is Censorship in Teaching History. And it is with Professor Michael Butler. Thank you very much. And we'd love to have you at that. It's a very, very important topic. April, we have a natural resources theme. It is April 26th. It's going to be at the Deltona Library, and it deals with flooding, which is another important issue. You can always find information out about us. Go to our league website, lwvvc.org, and you'll find out all of our programs and things that are going on. And if you're thinking of joining a wonderful organization, we'd love to have you part of us. I also, at this time, before we leave, do want to thank our State League co-president, Cecile Schoon. Cecile was unable to join us tonight because of a death in her family, but she was behind the scenes assisting us. And behind that cell phone camera at his house tonight is Blake Summerlin, who's from the state office, who's making sure that this gets streamed across the state. So again, I want to thank our candidates, I want to thank our team, and I want to thank you for showing up and being an informed voter. And as Ann said, number one request, please make sure you vote. But again, thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Have a nice evening.
Thank you all so